Joe, our Lord suffered all the indignities on the earth, and he conquered them. If I'm to be his minister, I can't turn from the path he made for us.
Those are pretty tough footsteps to follow.
But it's our duty to try, isn't it?
At its peak, Bonanza was practically a religion. Preachers in Mississippi were cutting Sunday services short so their congregations could get home in time to watch it. And the show sold more color televisions than any ad campaign in history. For 14 seasons, the Cartwright family of the Ponderosa was about as untouchable as it gets in American pop culture. So when NBC looked at a finished, fully filmed episode of their crown jewel and said, yeah, we can't air that, you have to wonder what on earth was in it. The answer is German shepherds named Satan, a strangulation, a backstory involving rape and suicide, a corrupt judge running what amounts to a slave camp, and Michael Landon, sweet curly-haired little Joe himself, writing every single word of it. The episode sat in a vault for nearly 3 years, caught between a nation coming apart at the seams and a network suddenly terrified of its own programming. This is the one episode of Bonanza that was too violent to air on TV. Before we saddle up and dive in, drop a comment below and tell us whether you think NBC made the right call pulling it or whether they caved to pressure they shouldn't have. The script behind the story.
See, Michael came from a family that was not functional. It was a dysfunctional family. And he bore the scars of that. He was a wonderful, very handsome young man and a great athlete. But psychologically, he had been wounded. He had been scarred.
And that tracks because the darkness producer David Dortort was describing didn't stay bottled up off set. It found its way onto the page. Kingdom of Fear started its life under a different name. Originally titled The Sound of Death, it was the 8th script Michael Landon had written for Bonanza and was intended to kick off season 10. The premise was grimly compelling. Ben Cartwright, his sons Hoss and Little Joe, and ranch foreman Candy Kennedy are falsely charged with trespassing, thrown onto a chain gang, and forced to dig for gold in a mining camp run by a demented land baron played by Alfred Reiter. That's the same Alfred Reiter who appeared in the very first episode of Star Trek, which gives you a sense of the caliber of guest talent the show was pulling at the time. Landon's inspiration reportedly came partly from Paul Newman's Cool Hand Luke, which had come out the year before and made a real cultural splash with its story of a man ground down by a corrupt prison system. You can also draw a line back to a 1962 Bonanza episode called The Crucible, which put Adam Cartwright through psychological torment at the hands of Lee Marvin's Lonely Desert Prospector. The unjustly imprisoned plotline was actually a well-worn device in the Western genre, showing up in episodes of Rawhide, Gunsmoke, and The Big Valley. But Landon's version was, by most accounts, the most brutal of the bunch. The supporting cast was strong. Richard Mulligan, years before he became a household name on Soap and Empty Nest, played a prisoner with a devastating backstory. His wife had been raped by the corrupt judge and hanged herself. And Mulligan's character is quietly waiting for his chance at revenge. Luke Askew, who also appeared in Cool Hand Luke itself, played a menacing guard who controls the prisoners using a pack of German shepherds named, fittingly, Satan. A nation on the edge.
Hundreds of marchers and dozens of policemen were injured. Restraint was absent on both sides. This was later called a police riot.
What you just saw was the mood of the entire country that summer. The episode was scheduled to begin filming June 12, 1968, at locations around Lake Tahoe and the McKinley Ranch. But the week before that shoot began, the world shifted again. Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated on June 5th, dying from his wounds in the early morning hours of June 6th. Lauren Green, Dan Blocker, and Landon were staying in Reno when the news came through. They were already in the middle of shooting the season premiere at Spooner Lake. It was an extraordinarily grim moment to be heading into production on a violent episode about forced labor and brutality. This came just 2 months after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been shot and killed in Memphis. The country was in open convulsion. The Democratic National Convention in Chicago that summer turned into a televised riot. Hundreds of American soldiers were dying in Vietnam every week. Households were bitterly divided over the draft and the war's purpose. The cultural fabric that had made lighthearted Sunday night television such a comfort was fraying badly, and the networks were caught in the middle of it. Against that backdrop, a Bonanza episode featuring attack dogs, whip-wielding guards, a hanging, and a brutal strangulation was not exactly what network executives wanted to be defending in the press. The violence that alarmed NBC.
I'll be around to see you get yours.
Well, watch your mouth, boy. I'm gonna let you go this time, boy. But you remember that sound. You remember it good, because that's the sound of death.
The specific content of The Sound of Death was genuinely harrowing by the standards of family television in 1968. A young ranch hand is murdered early in the episode. German shepherds are unleashed on escaping prisoners, including Little Joe. Hoss gets a savage whipping. Candy kills a guard with a knife. And in the episode's most disturbing stretch, Mulligan's character describes how his wife was raped by the corrupt judge before taking her own life, after which Mulligan strangles Ryder on screen, blood visible on the shirt. Pressure was closing in from every direction. On June 10th, New York Times journalist Jack Gould published a widely read piece warning that television had normalized violence as a way of settling disputes. President Lyndon Johnson responded by convening a National Violence Commission and summoning executives from all three major networks to Washington. Senator John Pastor of Rhode Island was holding fiery hearings on the subject. The Surgeon General launched a 3-year, $1 million study into the effects of television violence on children. According to Bonanza insider Andy Clyde, NBC President Julian Goodman issued an edict instructing all shows on the network to reduce violence as much as possible. ABC and CBS quickly followed. The Sound of Death, which had just wrapped production, was caught directly in those crosshairs. Jerry Buck of the Associated Press reported that NBC shelved the episode at a loss of $235,000. 3 years on a shelf.
Judges, kill them all. You'll hang if you don't. Now kill him! All right, drop him! Drop him!
The episode sat in storage while Bonanza continued without it. CBS was so rattled by the climate that it canceled Robert Conrad's Wild Wild West in 1969, despite the show winning its time slot, a decision producer Bruce Lansbury called a sacrificial lamb move. The whole industry was trying to look cooperative. Nearly 3 years after it was filmed, The Sound of Death was brought back out and reworked. It was retitled Kingdom of Fear, re-edited and rescored. Even one of composer David Rose's musical cues was reportedly cut because NBC felt it was too haunting. Specific scenes were trimmed or removed. The moment when the dogs attack Little Joe after he forces Askew to swap shirts at rifle point was cut entirely. Hoss's beating was significantly shortened. Mulligan's strangling of Ryder ends before the full scene plays out, even though blood is still visible on Ryder's shirt moments later, which created a minor continuity oddity. Stuntman Jay Jones, who played the mustachioed whip-wielding guard in the episode, believed the dogs were NBC's central problem with the whole thing. Askew's line, threatening Landon with the German shepherds, The Sound of Death, is what gave the episode its original title, and cutting or softening those scenes gutted some of the story's menace. Kingdom of Fear airs at last.
All right, now hold on, you two. Nervous I am, but backing out I ain't. I'm just anxious, that's all.
Kingdom of Fear finally aired April 4th, 1971, as the second-to-last episode of Season 12. The date turned out to be the third anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Whether that timing was coincidental or deliberate, no one said publicly. The 3-year delay created a few visible oddities for attentive viewers. David Canary, who played Candy, had left the show over a contract dispute at the end of Season 11, so his appearance in Kingdom of Fear had to be billed as a special appearance. Landon's hair in the episode was also noticeably different from how it looked in Season 12, since the footage was filmed back in 1968 when he was wearing it longer. Small details, but the kind of thing that reminded viewers something unusual had happened with this particular episode. Bonanza creator David Dortert had sometimes criticized Landon's writing for leaning too sentimental. You can see a trace of that in one quietly moving scene where Mulligan's character says farewell at his wife's grave. But by most accounts, Kingdom of Fear is one of the grittiest and most tightly constructed episodes of the series. It took a volatile moment in American history, a political climate obsessed with the damage television could do, and a network caught between artistic content and public pressure to produce one of the most unusual stories in the show's long run. Now it's time to hear from you. If you've ever seen this episode, we want to know what you thought of it. Did it feel like NBC was right to hold it back? Or did it seem like a perfectly solid episode? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below.